Today we are continuing our sermon series on the minor prophets, text messages of judgment and hope. And today we'll become a bit more familiar with the ministry and message from Habakkuk. I invite you to consider the word of the Lord from Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. The first verse I will read is the prophet speaking, and then verses 2 through 4, God's response. I will stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, "Make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. By this point in our sermon series, you could probably guess that the book of Habakkuk will announce that in time, unjust leaders will be punished and that justice will prevail. Well, if you guessed that, you would be correct. Yet, in addition to knowing that, to guessing that ahead of time, there is a special lesson that this prophet offers us. This prophetic book offers an inside look as to how the prophet wrestled with impatience and wondered when justice would prevail. The question the prophet had is a question that we ourselves have today. Individuals in about any congregation are used to personally experiencing or observing others waiting for restoration in a particular circumstance. People offer up prayers of petition on behalf of others as they sit tight for the results of a medical test, or hang on until it is finally time to have that long-awaited surgery. Groups of us may gather outside these sanctuary doors when we hear about a tragedy that has happened upon someone or a family, and we wonder how and when will that family be able to overcome that situation. A congregation such as this one may pray diligently for their pastor nominating committee, that they have wisdom and energy as it engages in the process of finding and identifying its next pastor. But meanwhile, in spite of all these questions and things that we wonder about, we continue to gather for worship and fellowship. I sometimes wonder that in addition to calling our worship spaces sanctuaries and chapels, we should call them waiting rooms, because we come and share with each other the answers that we are waiting for. Petitions for aid and comfort and direction occur frequently here as well as other houses of worship. The temple in Jerusalem would have been such a place. It is thought that the prophet Habakkuk was not only a resident of Judah and lived in Jerusalem, but that he was employed at the temple. From his vantage point, he would have had a different view of the miscarriage of justice in the political, judicial, and economic institutions of Judah and in its capital. I can imagine that in between his duties, he would have had the opportunity to talk to God directly in that set-aside place. Much of the book of Habakkuk is structured as a debate between the prophet and God. And there are two arguments that we can read in the first and second chapters of the book. In the first argument, Habakkuk complains to God about the injustice in Judean society. And he bravely goes on to say that he thinks God is failing to act upon it. Have any of you ever been so direct with God? Eugene Peterson, a theologian and the translator who created the Message Bible, captured Habakkuk addressing God in this way: God, how long do I have to cry out for help before you listen? How many times do I have to yell, help, murder, police, before you finally come to the rescue? Law and order fall to pieces. Justice is a joke. The wicked have the righteous hamstrung and stand justice on its head. God replies to the boldness of Habakkuk by saying that the fierce Chaldeans are about to invade Judah, and they will bring down that corrupt government and finally put an end to its unjust policies and practices. Now, the people who are termed the Chaldeans in Habakkuk, we more frequently know as the Neo-Babylonians, the Babylonian Empire, who will come and force people to be deported. Before they come to Judah to overtake it, they've already become infamous for their brutality, the way they grabbed up nations and the way they mistreated people. Well, having heard God's answer to his original complaint, Habakkuk just argued with God some more. What? What are you telling me, God? The solution to a corrupt Judah will be the invasion of a ruthless, godless nation? How can that be any solution? Habakkuk questions God's idea of a just rule. The prophet closes his second argument by doing what we just read in verse 1 of chapter 2. He closed his argument by standing at his watch post and waiting for what the Lord would say to him about that. And God said this: write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. That is the New Revised Standard Version, which we just heard. The New International Version says that a herald may run with it. So the idea is that this vision would be written on stone tablets, which is how an edict would have been recorded. Can you imagine writing something like that in bold, all capital letters, and it's to be so clearly visible that others can see it too, and it can remind the person, such as the prophet, of the message God has delivered? Habakkuk is instructed, or commissioned, if you will, to record the vision so that when it is fulfilled, Habakkuk and others can go back and remember that God fulfilled a pledge. Some of us may identify with the reluctance, if any reluctance, that Habakkuk had about recording the vision and then spreading the news about it, the uneasy news about it. Has anyone here ever been in the uncomfortable position of being asked by a supervisor at work to do something that just didn't seem to make much sense? Or to be presented with the solution, but as you think ahead a step or two, you're just not sure that that plan of action is going to bring about a favorable outcome? Well, if so, you're in good company, because there are others who can relate to that, and others can relate to Habakkuk in that same way. Habakkuk questioned how the violence and evil of one people could serve the purposes of God's justice. God responded by relaying that there is a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end, meaning it may not satisfy your yearning here and today, but it speaks of the end, and it does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. Surely it will come, it will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right within them, but the righteous live by their faith. This phrase, the righteous live by their faith, may sound familiar. It is something that the Apostle Paul offers up in Romans chapter 1. It is something that we may have seen on signs or decorative pillows that we keep at home when we like to keep those encouraging scriptural words around so that we are in a difficult situation, we are reminded that the righteous live by faith. Although Habakkuk is bewildered by the thought that God's purposes may come around through an unsuspecting source, the prophet nonetheless is called to trust God's assurances. The prophet is directed to maintain his commitment to justice and principles, even when they seem absent around him. Living by our faith is more challenging at certain times in our lives than others. Yet leaning on it can support us and guide us as we make other choices. Trust that God's purposes will prevail can empower those who dedicate energy and time to engage in acts of justice, even when it seems that their work isn't enough. It can be enough to keep them going, to power the people who are focused on answering the needs of children and families as they prepare for back to school, so that all students will have the resources they need and well-fitting, appropriately sized clothing so that they can enter into a classroom and be even with their peers. There are people who work hard to provide nutritious food to individuals and families who are stretching their dollars to make their weekly and monthly budgets. And there are those who are wondering when justice will prevail on the cost of life-preserving prescriptions that people are really struggling to pay for now. Those out west may be clinging to the belief that the upcoming fall weather will give them a break as they continue to live with and battle the wildfires. And although they may cling to that hope, I think it is still great to pray to God for some serious rainfall and cooler weather now to help them in that situation. Allegiance to God's purposes and recognizing that the Almighty may use anyone as a player to bring about in time God's purposes can help us keep perspective when we want to give up hope. In those situations where people seem to be entrenched in an argument over a contemporary issue, perhaps that discomfort that we feel, that aggravation that no one is really doing something is serving a purpose. Because perhaps the breakthrough will be the way we're going about this situation isn't getting us any closer. And so perhaps it is those stuck conversations that are helping people realize that we must break out of the walls in the rooms we put ourselves in and to work together to bring about good for all. His name may be unfamiliar to us and it may be new, but our Old Testament prophetic friend Habakkuk teaches us a lot through his example in a 3-chapter book. He teaches us that it is okay to lament to God, to lay out our complaint, tell God exactly what's on our mind, what's troubling us, and to even question the way in which we think God is going about bringing justice around. Habakkuk tells us that God hears our lament and complaints and will answer us. Meanwhile, as we continue to wrestle with injustice in our world and in other situations in our lives, we ought to be prepared to know that God may challenge us, that no matter how we feel about a situation, we may be called to write out plainly on a tablet or on an index card to keep in our refrigerator that God has promised to bring about justice and to bring out peace. And when we are called to write out the vision and to make it plain so that we may share that vision with others and remind ourselves of it, may it serve as a guide, guiding our decisions and our actions today, so that the way in which we go about God's world will be a partner with God in living out creation in which God intended. Now to the one who by the power at work within us is able to do far more abundantly than we can ever ask or imagine. To God be the glory in the church and in Jesus Christ to all generations, forever and ever. Amen.